Mr. Johnson, I don't care what your report says. My son does not fail exams. The sharp voice of Ashley Brooks, a wealthy white mother dressed in designer beige, cut through principal's office like a blade. Her son, Brandon, 12, sat small beside her, staring at the floor. Across the desk stood Malik Johnson, a tall black teacher in a crisp shirt and calm eyes that carried more patience than most people could imagine. Ashley's lips curled. I pay $50,000 a year for this school, and you think a substitute teacher can judge my child's intelligence? Malik kept his tone even. Ma'am, Brandon is bright, but he's been struggling with focus and assignments. The grade reflects his effort, not his potential. Ashley leaned forward, her perfume heavy in the air. Effort? Are you implying my son doesn't try hard enough? Maybe the problem isn't my son. Maybe it's you. A quiet stillness filled the room. The principal shifted uncomfortably, sensing what was coming. Malik didn't flinch. I'm only implying that fairness matters, he said. Every student is graded the same. Ashley smirked. Fairness? Don't lecture me about fairness, Mr. Johnson. My family has kept this school afloat for years. People like you wouldn't understand how this institution works. The words hung heavy. People like you. Brandon's face flushed with shame. Malik's eyes softened, not with weakness, but with the strength of a man used to swallowing pride for peace. He looked at her calmly. One day, Mrs. Brooks, you'll wish you hadn't said that. Her laughter was sharp. I doubt that. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Ashley crossed her arms. You'll be out of the school by the end of the day. I'll make sure of it. Malik said nothing, just adjusted his tie, his composure unbroken. Inside, he'd seen this scene before. Arrogance dressed as power, prejudice hidden behind money. But this time, he sensed something different. He didn't know yet that this confrontation would expose more than grades. It would uncover a secret capable of turning Ashley Brooks' perfect world upside down. The morning light filtered through the classroom blinds as Malik Johnson erased equations from the whiteboard. The smell of dry markers and coffee hung in the air, the ordinary calm before storms like yesterday's. He had taught in public schools, community centers, and even night classes for single parents trying to earn their diplomas. But here, inside this polished private academy, arrogance often wore perfume and pearls. Malik glanced at the empty seats. Students here had everything: tutors, tablets, chauffeurs, except humility. And yet, that was what he taught most. Math teaches patience, he used to tell them. You can't rush logic. Across the hall, Brandon Brooks sat alone, pretending to read. The boy had raw potential. His answers were sharp when he tried, but he carried the same pressure his mother carried pride. At home, perfection wasn't a goal, it was a prison. Malik remembered the first week he taught Brandon. The boy had smiled, even stayed after class for help. But as weeks passed, that spark dimmed. Brandon stopped turning in work. Then came excuses, fear, silence. Malik had seen that pattern before, a parent's expectations crushing a child's confidence. He sighed and picked up the failed midterm again. Red circles covered the page, but the mistakes were honest, signs of someone trying, not someone careless. If only his mother could see that, he thought. If only she wanted to. Down the hall, whispers spread. Parents gossip fast in schools like this. The story of a rich mother and her black teacher had already begun to travel. Malik had been here long enough to know what came next. Meetings, politics, quiet threats wrapped in polite emails. Still, he wasn't afraid. He had faced worse, and truth had a way of surviving arrogance. He placed Brandon's test in a separate folder labeled Second Chances and locked it in his drawer. Outside his window, students laughed, running across the field. Malik watched them, his voice soft in the empty room. Someday, one of them will learn what fairness really means. By the next morning, the story had already grown legs. Parents were whispering in the hallways. Emails were flying, and Principal Harris had a headache before her first cup of coffee. In the middle of it stood Ashley Brooks, wrapped in confidence like armor. She marched into the principal's office, her heels clicking sharp against the floor. "I warned you yesterday," she began, "and now I've spoken to the board chairman. That teacher needs to be gone before noon." Principal Harris kept her voice steady. "Mrs. Brooks, I reviewed Mr. Johnson's record. He's one of our most qualified educators. He's done nothing wrong." Ashley crossed her arms. "Qualified? My son's never failed a class in his life. Then he shows up, and suddenly, Brandon's grades collapse? You think that's a coincidence?" Malik stood near the window, silent but composed. "It's not a coincidence," he said. "It's reality. Brandon's capable, but he's under pressure to be perfect. Sometimes kids need space to fail safely so they can learn." Ashley's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture me about parenting." Her voice turned sharper. "You think I don't see what this is? You don't belong in a place like Westbrook Academy. This school used to have standards." The words hit like a slap. The principal's face went pale. Malik just inhaled slowly, a steadying breath of dignity. "With respect, Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "standards don't mean shutting doors on good teachers." Ashley laughed, the sound brittle. "Standards mean keeping this place respectable. My father helped fund that new science wing. I won't let this institution turn into a charity project." "Enough," the principal snapped. "That's not acceptable language." Ashley turned toward her. "Unacceptable? I'll tell you what's unacceptable. Paying $50,000 a year and getting mediocrity. I'm calling the board meeting myself." She pulled out her phone, thumbs flying over the screen. "Let's see how long the so-called teacher lasts once real power gets involved." Malik remained still, his calm more powerful than anger. "Do what you have to, Mrs. Brooks," he said softly. "The truth doesn't need defense. It just needs time." Ashley's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret saying that." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. The silence that followed felt heavy, the kind that leaves marks on walls and people. The principal exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Malik, I'm sorry. I've dealt with her before. She'll twist the story however she wants." Malik looked down at Brandon's test folder in his hand. "Then I'll just have to let the truth speak louder than she does. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." The boardroom smelled of polished wood and money. Framed photos of donors lined the walls. One of them showed Ashley's late husband shaking hands with the chairman. Now, she sat at the long mahogany table, her pearl earrings catching the light, playing the part of the calm, misunderstood parent. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice," she said sweetly. "I love this school, and I only want what's best for our students. But I can't stay silent when incompetence is allowed to thrive in the classroom." Across the table sat Malik Johnson, silent, composed, dressed in a dark blue suit that matched the gravity in his eyes. He said nothing. Years of experience had taught him that truth didn't need to shout. "Mr. Johnson," began Chairman Reynolds, "you've heard the allegations. Do you have anything to say before we continue?" Malik looked straight at Ashley. "Only that my conscience is clear. I graded Brandon fairly. I teach all students by the same standards." Ashley folded her arms, her smile tight. "Standards?" she repeated, laughing softly. "This isn't about grades. It's about respect. The way he spoke to me yesterday was unacceptable. He accused me of being racist in front of my child." "That's not what happened," said Principal Harris, her tone calm but firm. "Mrs. Brooks, I was in the room. You questioned Mr. Johnson's background and implied he didn't belong at the school." Ashley's eyes flickered, her mask slipping for half a second. "That's a lie," she said quickly. "There's no proof of that." Principal Harris reached for a file. "Actually, there is." She placed a silver tablet on the table. The screen paused on a video feed. The principal's office from the day before. Ashley blinked. "There are cameras in your office?" With audio, Principal Harris said evenly, "You approved the policy yourself last year." For the first time, the color drained from Ashley's face. The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Chairman Reynolds looked between them. "We'll review the footage privately," he said. "But Mrs. Brooks, If what we're hearing is accurate, this meeting may not go the way you expect. Ashley forced a shaky smile. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Malik finally spoke, his voice steady but edged with quiet authority. No misunderstanding, sir. Just the truth waiting to be heard. The chairman nodded slowly. Then let's hear it. The footage began to play. Ashley's confident smile disappeared the moment her own voice echoed through the speakers. People like you don't belong in elite schools. Every word that followed struck the room like thunder. The recording captured her tone, condescending, cold, and unmistakably racist. Gasps filled the boardroom. The same people who had smiled politely at her for years now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ashley's hand trembled against the table. That was taken out of context, she stammered. I was upset any mother would be. Chairman Reynolds leaned forward, his tone measured but cutting. Context doesn't erase the truth, Mrs. Brooks. Those are your words. You insulted a teacher who was doing his job with dignity. Principal Harris added softly, you question his place here, not his teaching. That's not concern, Ashley. That's prejudice. Ashley looked around the table, searching for an ally. None of the faces looked back with sympathy. The silence pressed against her like a weight. Her power, built on reputation and donations, was slipping through her fingers. Malik stayed quiet. He didn't need to speak. The truth was finally speaking for him. The chairman sighed. Mr. Johnson, you've handled this with restraint and grace. I'm sorry you had to experience such behavior in this institution. Ashley's breathing grew uneven. You're turning this against me, she said, voice shaking. After everything my family's done for this school? No one's turning anything, the chairman replied calmly. We're simply seeing things as they are. Tears welled in Ashley's eyes, not from guilt yet, but from humiliation. She had spent her life commanding rooms. Now, those same rooms were watching her unravel. Malik finally lifted his gaze, his tone quiet but firm. Maybe now, Mrs. Brooks, Brandon will learn what real integrity looks like. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, Ashley Brooks had nothing left to say. The chairman folded his hands, studying Ashley across the table. Mrs. Brooks, he said, before you make any more claims, there's something you should know about Mr. Johnson. Ashley straightened, forcing composure. What could I possibly need to know? He turned toward Malik. You've been modest about your background, haven't you? Malik's tone remained calm. I didn't see a reason to mention it. My work speaks for itself. The chairman nodded. For the record, everyone should know Mr. Malik Johnson isn't just a substitute teacher. He's a PhD in education from Howard University, a published author, and the son of Dr. James Johnson, one of the founding board members of this very academy. In fact, the scholarship program your family donates to exists because of his father's work. The room went dead silent. Ashley's face drained of color. That's not possible, she whispered. Dr. Johnson built the Diversity Foundation. My father spoke of him often. He admired him. Malik looked at her gently. He did. They worked together for years. I grew up hearing about integrity and fairness, values the school was supposed to represent. Ashley's voice trembled. I didn't know. I thought you were just... Malik interrupted softly. A teacher who didn't fit your idea of success? Her eyes welled up. I was wrong. The chairman leaned forward. You didn't just insult a teacher, Mrs. Brooks. You disrespected a man whose family helped make this academy what it is. You owe him, and this institution, an apology. Tears rolled down her face. You're right, she whispered. I let my anger and pride speak for me. I've taught my son to chase perfection instead of character. Malik exhaled slowly, his voice carrying both grace and gravity. Redemption starts when truth is louder than fear. Ashley nodded weakly, her once icy voice breaking. I'm sorry, truly. When the meeting ended, the boardroom emptied in silence. Only Malik Johnson, Ashley Brooks, and Principal Harris remained. Ashley sat motionless, eyes fixed on the table, the same table where she had once felt untouchable. Now, The weight of her own words felt heavier than any punishment. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "I've spent my life believing money could fix everything. But today, I learned there are things it can't buy, like dignity." Malik stood across from her, his tone steady but gentle. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction, Mrs. Brooks. It's a lesson. What matters now is what you teach Brandon after this." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "He doesn't deserve to carry my mistakes." "Then show him," Malik replied. "Show him that owning your wrongs is strength, not weakness." Principal Harris nodded approvingly. "That's the example he needs, not perfection, but humility." Ashley rose slowly, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your patience and your grace. I promise I'll do better." Malik gave a small nod. "Then we both did our jobs today." Outside, the afternoon sun spilled through the hallway windows. Brandon waited near the lockers, his backpack at his feet. When he saw Malik, his face fell. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry about what my mom said." Malik smiled faintly. "You don't need to apologize for someone else. Son, you just keep learning. Ask questions. Try again. That's how you grow." Brandon's eyes lit with quiet relief. "Can I still come to your help sessions?" "Of course," Malik said. "Second chances don't expire." As Ashley watched from a distance, she realized the lesson wasn't just for her son. It was for her too. That night, Malik locked his classroom door, the echo of the day still heavy in his mind. But beneath it all, he felt peace. Not victory, just justice. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.